What's one of the most historic places in northern Arkansas on the White River that has so many multiple layers of history? Well, we were at that location today. In my mind, it's one of the most important. It's not, there's a lot of important ones, but this one is Talberts Ferry, also known as Mooney's Ferry. Oh, the history here from the Trail of Tears to the Civil War and on. We're going to dive into it and we're going to have a lot of fun. Are you ready? Let's go. Hey, here we are again today in Ozarks history on the White River. I want to thank everyone for being friends of the Ozarks here and sharing and liking our videos here and just telling others about that. Thank you for all who are hitting the like and subscribe button, and please share this along. I'm just honored to be friends with you here on Ozarks history. So now we are down here on Talberts Ferry. It's also called Mooney Ferry. There's a lot of history that has been woven into this, as I said before, that I just come down here and I can just feel the weight of history all over. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. So here we go. So the reason Talberts Ferry or Talbot's Ferry is important, number one, it ferries across right here, and this point right here on across, and the terminus is right up over here, across the White River into Marion County. Well, originally in the early 1830s, we decided in Arkansas, and we needed a military road. And so we have a military road from all the way across Arkansas. We have it from Pocahontas all the way down to Batesville, Arkansas to Fort Smith. This is part of that road that was surveyed and cleared off that we could use for military purposes and for traveling purposes. And the military purpose we'll see in a moment. But where it comes at in Baxter County, it's a little bit difficult. We know part of it came across maybe there at Liberty, which is called Norfolk. There's another ferry on up the way from Norfolk, probably about 6 miles up the Norfolk River, the North Fork of the White River. That's back in the 1800s. That was called, I believe it was called the Collins Ferry. But it works across all the way Baxter County, and a lot of people will know the old military road. Well, the old military road runs across Baxter County, and then it kind of abruptly ends, but it kind of takes off through the field, that military road, and then it ends up on a place called Tucker Cemetery Road. And from Tucker Cemetery Road, you run to the end of it, you hit Highway 126, and then ba-boom, we're down here. We end up on Wildcat Shoals Road. Wildcat. Oh, that's a good name. Wildcat Shoals Road. And at the bottom of Wildcat Shoals Road, you're going to turn right. You're going to go a few hundred yards, maybe a quarter mile, a few hundred yards. Then you're going to turn left down here on Talbert Barrens. Down here on the Barrens, it's flat down here. There's our airport down here. Down on Talbert Barrens, and you're going to work your way down across Talbert Barrens, go down the little hill and turn right. And now we are at Talberts Ferry. Now, Talberts Ferry, the name has changed with Talbert. There's quite a few different ways you can spell Talbert. T-A-L-B-E-R-T, B-U-R-T. Actually, in the very beginning, the 1800s, 1820s, it was Talbot, T-O-L-B-O-T. And so the name spelling kind of changed a little bit here and there, but we still have the Talbert family here in Baxter County, Arkansas. I think there's even a couple Talberts over there in Marion County for the burials. All still the same family and still connected. So not only did we have the ferry here, we had a trading post up on the berm, up on the flat here before it comes down here to the river. So we have a trading post there. That trading post actually was for sale, and it was in the Little Rock newspapers in the late 1820s. We even have postings of the tavern and the crossing down here for sale in Little Rock newspapers, and I believe also Batesville newspapers for the Talbert Ferry that was for sale. From the Talberts, it switched over to another family of John Goodman. And John Goodman was up here on the hill, and he had his trading post up here. There was a post office up here also. One of the guys, young men that worked there, he's the one that helped chronicle some of the stories that came from here. And his family is over on across the White River on the Flippin Barrens. His name was W.B. Flippin, would be William Baugh Flippin. And from William Baugh Flippin, we can find out some more evidence of what happened here and from the story. Now, this is not primary source. If for the historians that get a little picky, I'm a historian, so I know what primary, secondary source is. This would be secondary. This is your newspaper print. And he's telling the story, what happened here. Those newspaper stories that happened here for the Trail of Tears came out in the late 1890s. I believe it was 1899 in the Mountain Echo from Yellville, Arkansas. But let's kind of pull it on back a little bit and dive into that history right here. So we're going to go in February of 1839. Now, the reason I'm down here, this is February right now, but the February that they were experiencing here in the Ozarks was a little different than what we're experiencing today. So it's going to get up to 60 degrees today. In 1839, they did not have that pleasure. By the records and by the stories from Mr. Flippin, the White River was down quite a bit, and so you could ford the river, and so you could actually wade on across and go up onto the Flippin Barrens up here, the Flippin Flats on the other side. Because of that, they have the Trail of Tears coming through here, and so what happens, we have probably about 1,100 the tribe from Cherokee, maybe some Creek. They were coming through and they came down the road here. And Mr. Flippin said that they didn't even wait to, barter or anything else to cross the ferry. They just waded across, and basically he said that the men, the Cherokee men, just kind of drove the women and children across the river like cattle. Now, things are a little bit different today. So you're going to see a little bit of water right here, and you're going to see that berm out there. So the river has changed. It's kind of morphed back and forth. It's changed over the years. So actually right out here by the old maps and records, the ferry would go right on out here to that berm. And from that berm, you could go in and cross. And this is a low part of the river during that time. It was anywhere from like 2 to 3 feet. When the river is up, you're going to need the ferry. So it's a ford and ferry. So what happened, the Goodmans owned this place after the Talberts. The Goodmans sold it. Major Jesse Mooney ended up owning this area right here. But we have, during that time, this is the Talbert, no, this would be Goodman Ferry, excuse me. Mr. Goodman owned it. So they just forded them on across. They went up on the flat up there, up on the prairie, and they built huge fires up there. And then they camped out for the night before they took off. By Mr. Flippin's account, and a lot of people go by his account, we have a couple guys. We have 2 guys from the Binge contingent. We have Binge and another guy by the name of Strong, I believe. They come right over here. They want to gamble. And so there's a guy named Irvin Hogan. And so he's actually buried over here in the New Oakland Cemetery. And he challenges him to a card game. And so they're sitting out here on a log. They just pull up right on the log and they start playing a card game called 7 Up. Things go good and bad, back and forth. And all of a sudden at the end of the night, one of the Cherokees by the name of Strong, he's lost some money. And so we can camp out over the night over on the other side of the river. They come back the next morning, and basically they're upset. They've lost some money. They're upset. I would be upset too. Basically, and some of the comments were, they drove us away and they're driving us west. We've lost our homes and everything else. We're being taken advantage of. And Mr. Hogan's like, well, I didn't do that to you. But he says, oh, but the white people did. And so he's making that point. So that good generalization. And so basically he wants to fight. Strong wants to fight Hogan, and it's not going to happen. Hogan's not going to do it. And so he says, I don't have a weapon. Binge has a couple pistols, And so Benj offers him a pistol, and Irvin Hogan is not going to pick up that pistol. He's not going to meet his maker that day. The money was settled back, and then they take off back across the river, and then they're going to head across Flippin' Barrens, going right on up the way to Flippin', Arkansas. Now the Cherokee, the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee followed that all the way to Yellville, to north of Yellville actually. They were going to bypass Yellville. Yellville at that time was known as a heavy liquor place. A lot of moonshine, a lot of whiskey at Yellville. Then from Yellville, they kind of do a detour around Yellville. Then they take off towards Carrollton. And from Carrollton, they're taking off towards Fayetteville area, and then Fayetteville area. And then they're heading on over to Oklahoma, to Indian Territory. But this is where one of the camping spots was at. And this is the ford that they crossed. Now, not everyone took the ford. Apparently they had some wagons and some things like that. They needed the ferry to take them across, and they did that there. I'll tell you why some of this has been changed. The flood of 1927 ripped apart so much on the land below down here for this whole area. There's been a lot of floods here on the White River. Historically, I've gone back, and there's one from 1826 was pretty bad. 1832, 1836, 1844. 1844, where I'm almost at river level, but 1844 was recorded at 31 feet above normal river level. My goodness. That's hard for me to contemplate, but we had the same thing going on in 1927 flood. The Mississippi flood of 27, well, it was more than Mississippi taking it. The Arkansas River, the White River, it was a huge flush. But that's why it's kind of changed down here. And so you're going to have to imagine more of a bottom down here than we have, and then stepping off over on the river. The other thing here on the White River, we're generating just a little bit, and also we have minimum flow going on. The reason we're having minimum flow is because big old trout, they cannot make it during without a minimum flow. The oxygen level drops, and boy, in the summertime, you can see big brown German trout just blub, 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 floating, starting to float up because they're not getting oxygen to their gills. During all the way up to the Bull Shoals Dam being completed in '52, this was a warm water stream. So we're talking coming out here catching, we're not catching trout, we're catching smallmouth, largemouth bass, we're catching perch, brim, sunfish, catfish. That's what was going on out here. And so it's a great source. And some of the fish they were pulling out of here and some of the fishing expeditions you can read in newspapers were just amazing. And so, but that's why this has kind of morphed and changed, because we have the flood of 27, and now we've got minimum flow coming through here. And so the river's higher than it would be in 1839. Now, since this is the military road, this is the road that would try to be accessed, and the river portion would be accessed to go over into Yellville. 1862 was a pretty soggy and wet year. And in April of 1862, April 19th, we have people coming down here, and so they're trying to access. And who are those people? That would happen to be the Union Army. And they hear of Yellville, Arkansas, and they're going to go into Yellville, Arkansas. They need access to this ferry here. And at that time of 1862, Major Jesse Mooney was owning that ferry. And so you got to imagine the ferry here, but the ferry wasn't here on April 19th, 1862. Where was the ferry? It was right up over that way. And so it was parked. And to get the Union Army, the cavalry across, they needed the ferry. And so there was a young lieutenant from Iowa, Major Hecock. He's down here. He was a school teacher. He's a young 20s, early 20s. Everyone loved him. The kid, bless his heart. He's down here with the Iowa 4th Cavalry. And so they're storming on down here, and they're coming down here. And the reason they're trying to get across also, right up on here, there's this big ridge and mountains. Up on that mountain there, and you start going up there, there's a lot of saltpeter. And so they are mining saltpeter starting up on that ridge, heading all the way up to Bull Shoals. So the best way to access that, you cannot get across the river at that time where the saltpeter cave was on the Marion County side, which was still, this was all Marion County, but today it's Marion County. So what you got to do, you got to go right here, you got to cross the river. You can access up on that hill right there to get up to the ridge. It's easier to get your horses up there. And then you can go up there and you can raid the saltpeter mine and everything else. So Hecock is standing right out here. And so he's asking the butternuts, the Confederates. They're called butternuts because they were wearing old homespun clothes, and they have this butternut color. And so all those guys, there's about 50 guys up there that were Confederate right across on that berm up there onto that flat of the prairie. And so he's asking them to send the ferry across. And apparently they are not doing anything about that, and they're making comments and rude gestures. And oh my goodness, somebody is across right over there and they fire a shot. This is where some say the first blood was drawn on the White River, and I kind of tend to believe that also. Lieutenant Hecock was hit right in the forehead. It's demoralizing the Army boys right here on the cavalry right here from the Iowa 4th. He drops to his knees and falls down. They pick him up and they drag him up here. They drag him up on the berm up across here, and the young man expires pretty quickly. They take him and throw him on a horse, and they take him all the way up to Douglas County, Missouri. About 14 miles southeast of Ava, there's a place called Vera Cruz out on the Bryant Creek, Bryant River. That's where a military installation is at. They bury him. After the Civil War, his family comes down from Iowa, and they exhume his body, they take it back to Iowa, and then they bury him up in a family cemetery in a plot up there in Iowa. But this is where, this was the contention point. If we can grab a hold of this point right here during the Civil War, we have access back and forth to Yellville. There was a raid also later that year in October. October 18th, there was a raid, and Lieutenant, he ended up being a captain, John Kelso documents this in his diary and journal, that they were going to come down here to access down here, but the problem is the river's too high. And so they're coming down from Forsyth, Missouri, and they're working their way on down through here, and they end up going down on Talbert Barrens and the prairie down there, which is Mountain Home, Arkansas. They get in a skirmish later on that night, actually at 2 o'clock in the morning. A relative of Major Mooney is in the Union Army. His name is Lieutenant Mooney. He's basically the one he gets shot in the hand. And by the end of that night, there are 14 Confederates that are dead, that are buried out on Tucker Flats or Tucker Prairie. And I think we need to go out there and just do a video on that. But it's all along the military road. They were camping along the military road. The Union cavalry were doing that. But the access point was here at Talbert Ferry, Mooney Ferry. Now, some fun things. Okay, now we've had some pretty sad things that actually happened through here. And we got a leaf blower going on in behind me up there at someone's house. That's okay. So this area has this nice bottom area right down through here. Well, we just got to take a look. I'm just going to swirl this around. See that there? Pretty nice. This is a nice river bottom down through here. This is where a lot of times they would access Mooney Ford or Mooney Ferry from Yellville, and they would come over and they would have picnics. This is where young men and women would get together in the 1800s, and they would spark. You ever hear of sparking? It's called flirting. We'd call sparking. They would do that there. They would also do that down at Denton Ferry. Now let's talk about Denton Ferry. Denton Ferry, some people are putting in that the Trail of Tears happened at Denton Ferry. Denton Ferry is 2 miles on down the road. And the reason some people are saying it was used at the Trail of Tears was at Denton Ferry is that they didn't want to pay the fee here to cross the river. Well, number one, the river was low enough. The women and children were just crossing the river down here. Nothing was done about a fee. Nothing was said about the money in the secondary sources. Nothing was said about that. There is no road going down the hill, Denton Ferry Road. There was no road access from Gassville or Cotter in 1839. The only road access that we have is down at Wildcat Shoals Road. Also, the Denton Ferry, and I've talked to some of the family members about this. Denton Ferry, and I've got the obituaries proven about when the obituary was put in, but the Denton Ferry was not established until 1872. 1839, 1872. So that access up there was not existent. It was not existent. This is the existent one. This is where the road crosses. This is why, in my mind, I don't understand why they would all of a sudden come down here when the access is here just to walk and wade straight across, go down 2 miles, and then cut across, and then they're going to have to come up out of the way and meet everybody else out there. In February, you just want to get, in my mind, I'm speculating here, okay? In my mind, you're coming down that hill, you hit the road, they're coming straight on down here. Why take and walk another it'd be 2 miles and then come back that way. It's about another 2.5 miles to hook back up. Why would you walk 4.5 extra miles when you can just cross over and build a fire in February? That's just my opinion. And so Talbert Ferry is where the Trail of Tears, the old military road access is at. And this thing is just beautiful down here. It's absolutely beautiful. The sun is shining. It's February. They didn't get that. They didn't get that luxury. Silas Turnbow has stories that he references Talberts Ferry right down here. Captain Albert Cravens. He's actually buried down. You go down the river about 2 miles, and there was a place called the Old Barb Cemetery. His tombstone still stands out there in the Barb Cemetery. It's an abandoned cemetery. And there's about 13, 14 others that are buried there also, but it's not a working cemetery. It's an abandoned cemetery on private property. But Albert Cravens, Captain Cravens was also in the Civil War, but the reason he's called captain, he had a steamboat. And there was a steamboat, he would bring the steamboat right up through this way, and he would mention this ferry here. And so I just love this. Well, I'll tell you what, we're working hard on another thing that's coming up on Ozarks history, and it has to do with fishing and the fishing tourism from the 1930s, a little bit in the 30s, but boy, we really kick it in the late 40s into the 1950s in the Twin Lakes area. Now, it's just not the Twin Lakes area in the 1940s and in the 1950s. It's the Tri-Lakes. We form an association. We have Norfolk Lake, we have Bull Shoals Lake, we have the White River here, but we're also forming an association, an alliance with Lake Taneycomo. That's around Branson all the way up into Forsyth, Missouri. We form an alliance. We are not enemies. We form an alliance, and we work together like a regional chamber of commerce. We're going to trade shows. We're pulling people in that are coming down here and they're visiting, and all of a sudden it's booming down here. So growing up in this area, we know about the migration from up north, from mainly, it's popularly known that Mountain Home used to be called Little Chicago. Where in the world did those Little Chicago people come from? They came from Upper Illinois, and they came down here because there was a lot of publicity going on because of the publications that were being put out in the trade shows from Lake Taneycomo, Lake Norfolk, and then Bull Shoals Lake. After a while, after 1954 or 55, Lake Taneycomo was kind of on its own. The two lakes were working here. We have Norfolk and Bull Shoals Lake. they were kind of spatting at each other. And so if I was Lake Taneycomo, I would go in and say, hey, let's all join together. Finally, there's a guy that came in, and this is the story coming up. Harold Ensley came in at a meeting at the Baxter County Courthouse and said, hey, you guys could actually grow this thing. You could actually have something here if you guys quit fighting amongst yourselves. And guess what happened? That's what we did. We quit fighting amongst ourselves. Now, with the big influx of people coming from up north, some of the local people had their noses out of joint. But I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for the people coming from up north with that money, we wouldn't have the facilities that we have today. We wouldn't have the progress we have today. But I'll tell you what also, some of the people from up north were kind of looking down their noses at some of us hicks down here and corn cobs that they would call us. So that's coming up. We're going to start diving into it. There are some interesting people in the Twin Lakes area that really gave a lot of muscle to us, gave a lot of power to us. Actually, there's a guy in Tulsa. Thank goodness for Tulsa. Tulsa, the radio station and TV station, was giving us publicity like all get out. KCMO up in Kansas City, Missouri. Oh my goodness, we were getting free publicity like crazy. St. Louis, Missouri, oh my word. Chicago, Nashville, Memphis, and Dallas. They started publicizing and reading about on their sports programs on TV and radio what was going on down here or up here, wherever you're located at. So we've got a lot coming up, and we're going to start diving in, and we're going to start hitting one person at a time. And then after that, we have some film and video that we are going to show from 1957 of some of the fishing here. I got a hold of there's another video from the early 1950s also that we're going to show here also on Ozarks history. And so I do love the Ozarks. I do love history, but I'm just not stuck in the 1800s. Folks, there's history everywhere. And I love prior, history that's just, even if, my goodness, I'm 58 years old. I love history that's during my lifetime. I love history that's during my parents when they were growing up. I love history when my grandparents were growing up. And so we're just going to start walking through these episodes of history in the Ozarks. I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so honored to have you. If you can, hit the button of subscribe and like, and tell your friends about this on Ozarks history, because coming up, we are going to dive into the heavily in the 1950s, late 40s, 1950s. For those who are kind of wondering, also that has emailed, and I've had emails about this, we're going to talk about in the 1930s up into the 40s of Elmo Hurst down at Denton Ferry, what he actually did here to start some of the guiding here. But then from then on, it just expands and blows up and down the White River, Norfolk Lake, and Bull Shoals Lake. Hey, I'm about to talk into another whole episode here. Thank you so much for showing up. We appreciate you. You have a great day, and we'll see you soon here from the Ozarks. Hey, right before you go, I have some video after this right here. I have video to show you, and we have walked right down here to Talberts Ferry, and I'll show you what it looks like walking down here. It's absolutely beautiful. See you soon. Bye-bye.